So the next thing on the list is Eatin. Clean, sensible eating. That is my advice for all of us. So the best quote I've ever heard was by a doctor, an expert on nutrition, Michael Pollan, and his 7 words, and I'm sure almost everybody has heard this before. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. The advice for eating, I believe, doesn't get any better than that. And it's so simple, but to me, it really, really, really hits the nail on the head. And it doesn't need to be made so complicated, and often that's an excuse for not eating healthy, is it's too complicated. I don't understand it. I don't understand nutrition. And I mean, in any area of your life, if you don't know, we live in an information where it actually doesn't cost anything to find out anything. Knowledge has actually been dispersed almost limitlessly, and with rare exception can be found, whether at the tip of your finger at your phone or your laptop. If you want to know about nutrition and how your digestive system works and good, healthy eating habits, in a couple of hours you could get a great base knowledge, and all you'd have to do is want to, and you don't even have to stop what you're doing, because you could listen in the car if it's a podcast or a video that you just don't watch. You could do while you're doing housework in the background. Like it's there for you. So the best way, I think, to actually execute eating healthy is a weekly meal plan. So I'm just going to pause now for the camera, and we'll go into the weekly meal plan. So I think that the weekly meal plan is the very, very best way to ensure that you and your family are eating healthy food. And it can be very, very overwhelming to change your diet and change your lifestyle, because we're all in our habits. I mean, let's be honest, most people eat more or less the same thing week in and week out, and we're just in our groups because that's human nature. So with weekly meal planning, you take a very small amount of time, 10 minutes. I mean, really, this is a 10-minute, maybe even a 5-minute activity. You take that time, but you reap the benefits the whole week. I've done meal planning for 10 straight consecutive days with only one trip to the store, and yet we ate so well, really high quality food, really healthy food that entire time, and it made it so easy. So just a little bit of investment in time can yield this fantastic dividend that you'll be enjoying every single day. So the process is really, really simple. Take out your notebook or write in your phone, it doesn't matter, as long as you're actually writing, recording what you're doing. Check your freezer, check your pantry, and check your fridge. See what you have, what ingredients need to be used up, and then build your meals from there. Don't reverse engineer it. Don't go looking for recipes online. Don't go to the grocery store and see what looks good. See what you have, build your meals, then make your meal plan, just Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, whatever it is. Typically my meal plans go Sunday to Friday. That's a typical meal plan. So then you make your shopping lists, and what you do is the meals that require fresh items go in the beginning of the week, and the meals that more come from the freezer or the pantry go to the end of the week. That way everybody in the family, and I suggest putting out the list where everyone can see it. That way everyone in the family knows exactly what they're going to eat on every day, and there's just no stress surrounding what's for dinner. My neighbor said the cutest thing to me the other day. She said that she told her husband that dinner was postponed until the next day. She couldn't figure out what to do. So her answer was dinner will be served in 24 hours. So you don't want that to happen, because that's when you call up the takeaway and you go through the drive-through, and the most insidious thing about not planning and letting yourself get too hungry is that you lose self-control. Once you reach that threshold that you're just ravenously hungry, all bets are off. Pretty much all of us are wired that way, in my opinion. So that's actually a reasonable expectation of yourself. So if you can reasonably expect that you're going to be out of control if you don't eat in a certain time frame, then when you have a healthy option there, that's easy to make and not overly time consuming, you're eating that, you'll be satisfied, and you can move on to the next thing. So that's really your roadmap to to success in terms of you can realistically diet when you know what you're going to be eating. And I think people get bogged down because they think that means they have to cook every single night of the week. And I do think it's important to cook a lot of your food as your time permits. But your work dinners, special occasions, parties, all of those things go on the list because you don't need dinner that night, and yet you'll need breakfast and lunch the next day. So you still have to account for what are you going to take to work as your lunch? What are you going to have in the morning? If you get home from that party, are you going to want a little snack, or are you going to come home ravenous and open up, the ice cream in the back of the freezer? So take into account the way your life really is when you're planning these things, because that just makes it realistic and that makes it feasible. So let's see. So I think something a lot of people get bogged down into is making specific recipes. Now, there are definitely recipes that I love to make. So back to recipes. So a lot of people get bogged down because they need to recreate specific recipes. And it's great to recreate specific recipes because the sensorial memory triggers are there. Same sauce that mama made. You have that wonderful sense of association. But just in terms of day-to-day eating, I think that it's great to just kind of take your expectations slightly down, lower, that you're just making good, nutritious food that is somewhat feasible and easy to make. So this is the ratio of portions of the three kind of elements that I suggest one eats on their, basically the proportion of the plate. So that would be 40% plant-based, and I suggest mostly vegetables. It's dinner time, you're probably going to want something savory, but some people love fruit in their food. Next is 30% starch. I'm a big proponent of the paleo diet. My body has done so much better with less wheat and rice in it, and definitely with less sugar. I took a couple of weeks off of the no sugar diet, that's for sure. So then I suggest replacing wheat and rice with quinoa and squash. And there's so many different kinds of squash. And also replacing white potatoes with yams. So the kinds of squash that are fantastic for replacing pasta or rice or bread is spaghetti squash, butternut squash, acorn squash, pumpkin. You can do so many things with these. You can really use them as a wonderful sorry, I've got a little kitten in my range of vision, and I'm watching her come towards the camera equipment. So anyway, squash can take on a lot of different flavors, and so can quinoa. Quinoa doesn't taste good to me on its own. At best, it tastes like nothing. So by adding different flavors, whether it's mushroom soup, pesto, salsa, if you're making something Latin food, these things on their own are a little ho-hum. Okay, but there's a lot you can do to make them appealing. So this is my sort of like baseline meal suggestion. 40% plants, 30% starch, 30% protein. Now, if you're trying to lose weight, if you're trying to really be a A student, I suggest 50% plant, 20% starch, and 30% protein. And this is one size fits all advice by and large. This is if you're vegan, you have different protein sources: peas, edamame, legumes. If you're a vegetarian, some of your protein sources might be dairy. And if you're a meat eater, then yes, that would be your animal fat and your animal protein. So if you focus on the fact that you're making good food, it has a nice flavor. It doesn't have to be chicken cordon bleu or this specific perfect thing that you're trying to recreate. If you're a lot more fluid, you can have a much more easily attainable and healthier result, because it's like, okay, I've got my veggies, I've got my meat, I've got my starch, it's nicely seasoned. You've really hit it out of the park, and it doesn't require, on a weeknight meal, it does not require anything more than that. So if that's what you're doing, give yourself a big pat on the back. And if you have been caught up on having this specific sort of recipe or the specific menu, that's an easy thing to let go of. And then you can just sort of follow what's in the fridge, what seasonings do I have on hand, what do I feel like? That's a great question to ask yourself. What do I feel like tasting? And that is that's something that I think is really, really hard for people when it comes to diet, is they think I'm never going to taste good tasting food again because they only associate that satisfied taste feeling with like MSG and frying and just all the artificial flavoring. Like you think like fried chicken, fried fish, or Dorito, they're so over the top. Pizza, so over the top flavorful, and they're so salty and fatty that it's almost like you get, and sugar, big one is sugar. It's like you gave your taste palate heroin, and then you got a headache and you try to take an aspirin, and it always comes up short because you've had that, opiate. So I do really, I've self-reflected a lot in the last year on food addiction and really how pernicious it is, because there's a stigma on being overweight, but people do kill themselves with bad diet. So it really is up there with one of the bad addictions, because what people are really searching for is the feeling they get when they have that hugely full stomach and they're just trying to fill themselves up with something, and it's not because they're hungry. Or for me, I had to admit to myself, like, I was eating not because I was hungry. I was trying to fill some void. For me it was stress eating, during the sort of the height of the election period. I know I wasn't the only one doing that. And going back to somewhat normal where, I'm not only just living for that one moment to stuff myself with lasagna. I'm really considering my whole self and my future self. But I guess that starts tomorrow. So something I think that's really, really important for the average person to understand is the difference between a whole food and a processed food. So before I was suggesting to replace starchy things with, like, for example, to replace pasta with spaghetti squash. I think that's one of the easiest swaps a person can make, because aside from the time in the oven, the spaghetti squash is almost like a no effort meal, and it can take on all kinds of great flavors, and it has an amazing texture when you cook it correctly. And so so a squash grows on the vine and it's harvested, and then you buy it at the grocery store, and it's one whole thing. Pasta was grown as wheat, and then the wheat was milled, and then the pasta dough was made, then it was extruded into pasta, then it was dried, that had to have some sort of preservative in it so that it could sit on the shelf and get to you from wherever. That's a processed food. I mean, compared to Doritos, maybe pasta isn't as processed, but it's not a whole food. An example of a whole food that is wheat is bulgur. Bulgur is the entire wheat seed that is, I think it's wetted with maybe lye water or something and cracked in the sun, or, it's one of the oldest, it's what's in tabbouleh, in Middle Eastern tabbouleh. So I think that's a really good way for people to grasp this concept in a very simple way, because a cheeseburger is not a whole food. It's not. It didn't grow on the vine. Almost everything in a salad is a whole food if it's mostly vegetables. So that's easy to do. An apple is a whole food. So that's something I want everyone, and it's not about the grocery store Whole Foods. It's about how did this item of food come to be, and what process did it came to make it. An egg is a whole food. You may be a vegan and you don't eat eggs, but it is a whole food because that egg, and then think about the opposite. Scrambled eggs in a bottle that you buy from the store is then a processed food. So let's see. So just one of the best advice that I could give anyone on top of this is just cut out the white sugar and the white flour. You'll just be so much better off. I mean, they're doing nothing good for you, and there's so many good replacements. And like I was saying about your palate changing, once you start to decrease your sugar, you will be so much more sensitive to what sugar you do have, and you won't want it so much. Once you cut down on your salt intake, you will not. It will be a it will be a transition period, but your palate will change. It will change, and it'll change faster than you think. And there are so many things that you can use to flavor your food that don't have any salt or any calories. Most among them fresh herbs. If you can throw fresh herbs and some spices, not spice blends with MSG and preservatives in them, just the dried spice into your food, you're gonna love eating it. It's just for the couple of seconds of shaking some spice onto your food, you will enjoy your food all the more. It's really worth a little bit of an effort, and I think that's why a lot of people complain, like, I don't like healthy food, it has no flavor, it has no flavor. Well, guess what? It's just like happiness. The happiness you have in life is what you put into your life. The flavor you have in your food is what you put into your food. So it's great to feel your palate change and your stomach shrink, because when your body becomes accustomed to the healthy food, and you go back and you have that other food as a treat, you'll enjoy it, I'm sure, but you'll also probably have a stomach ache. And you'll remember that the next time you want to eat it. So my last thing about diet is that it is very, very true point to say eating healthy is expensive. I wouldn't disagree with that whatsoever, but at the same time, I think there are a lot of people that use that as an excuse and just live on fast food. And fast food is not as cheap as, I mean, I'm not a big fast food person. Granted, I love an In-N-Out burger now and again, but it's not that cheap, maybe compared to the way it used to be. So if you actually took that person's actual spending in fast food as a budget, they could definitely buy reasonably healthy groceries for that. If you had to eat quinoa or brown rice and peas and garbanzo beans rather than a Big Mac, you may not enjoy it as much, but it could save your life, and it does cost less. It really does cost less. Food is extremely expensive, but there's more options for discount food retailers than ever. And all it takes is searching out a little bit, and it's there for you. So that's my pitch, is that you can actually enjoy this small amount of high quality food so much more than you ever enjoyed mindlessly eating a bunch of processed food. So don't feel like it's not available to you. Healthy eating is not available to you. Anyone that's watching this that is having a hard time meeting their basic needs, so basic as actual food, my heart absolutely goes out to you. That is an extremely painful and all too common situation that people find themselves in this country, but all I can say is take what little money you do have and try to wring absolutely every cent out of it with healthy food. And even in the 99-cent store, there are healthy options. They may be in the freezer section in the form of frozen vegetables and canned vegetables, but just try to do at the best you can and break the cycle of the fast food, because that's really, really, in my mind, the worst of it all. So that's the end of eating. Obviously, I think a lot about eating, and I do a lot of eating.